Hi, everyone. We're giving people a moment to join from the waiting room. Thank you so much for joining. We're very excited to start this webinar. This is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm here from the HEALEY Center for ALS and Mass General. I'm here with our patient navigation team, Alison and Catherine. As every week, we're here to bring you ALS news. And as you know, the second Thursday of every month, we are really, really excited to have a series focusing on expanded access, or EAP. And for today, we have two fantastic guests. Thank you so much, Shawn and Hristelina, for joining. We're going to hear from them about their wonderful initiatives. So we'll get started with Mr. Shawn Sarbacker, followed by Dr. Ilieva. Shawn?
Thanks, Sabrina. Well, first, it's an honor to be here on the HEALEY webinar. I'm a big fan and regular participant, so nice to have a chance to contribute. If you could go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of our patient-led fundraising and a project I started called TechVSALS. Next slide. So a little bit about me. So I'm a 56-year-old father of 3+1. I was remarried in August of 22. My lovely wife's right over here. I call it a love story. So sorry about the ALS reference there. But we met when I was 4 months post-diagnosis, and I told her, and she said, well, at least it's not cancer. So there we go, better than cancer. But it's been fantastic ever since, and I give her a lot of credit for as doing as well as I have with this disease. So really, really fantastic. So I live in Philly. I'm presenting here from the Jefferson Weinburg Center. They have their open house today here with Dr. Ilieva. My day job, I run a global chip assembly equipment business for Kulik and Safa. If you don't make computer chips, you've never heard of us. If you do, you realize we make about half the computer chips in the world on our equipment. So very cool company, and that's really the tech connection and TechVSALS. I had the misfortune to be diagnosed with ALS in November of 2020. I had the great fortune to be directed to Dr. Merritt at Mass General, and am so appreciative she took me on as a patient in December of 2020. Along the way, I joined the CLEAN CNM AU8 expanded access program, and I would really like to express my deep appreciation to CLEAN. They've been at the forefront of the EAP movement, and unscientifically, I credit some of my slow progression to CLEAN. So thank you so much to the entire CLEAN organization. And then, I realized that EAP was a desperate need of the community. So I founded TechVSALS in February 22. And as you'll hear, mostly focused on promoting EAP programs. So next slide. All right, so the problem we wanted to solve was, as we realized there's lots of promising therapies in the pipeline, but for those of us who are outside the window of clinical trials or ineligible, we just can't gain access to these life-extending or life-saving therapies. And of course, we all know, even phase 3 clinical trials plus regulatory approval, you're looking at 3 to 4 years, which is, as we know, beyond the average life expectancy of an ALS patient. So, how do we get these therapies in patients? The solution is really expanded access programs. Next slide, please. So why is expanded access critical? First off, the moral imperative, the harsh but the realistic hashtag of the ALS community is dying waiting, waiting for therapies to come through, waiting to have a chance, waiting to have a hope. we really need to address this community. In addition to that, there's expanded clinical learnings. It supports FDA approval by augmenting the primary clinical trial data, and many believe it can help with insurance approval, expanding, giving therapy beyond the narrowly targeted group in the clinical trial. And then, of course, it bridges the availability gap between successful trials and FDA approval. If we look back to Relyvrio, it was really almost 2 years between the end of the successful phase 2 trial and the approval by the FDA. So, as these therapies come out, we need a mechanism to get them into patients without having to wait for the approval cycle. Next slide, please. So I came up with a fundraising initiative, and the strategy was first, partner with Success and the amazing team at the HEALEY Center. I'll talk more about those. The idea is to solicit sponsorship from entities in my tech world and raise money for a HEALEY platform trial companion expanded access program to combat ALS. We want to initiate EAP programs at sponsor designated sites, which was kind of a big deal because coming from the corporate world, I realized companies want to have impacts where their employees are in the communities they operate. So if we could allow sponsors to target specific sites, that would resonate with them, and that's been very powerful for us. And then we reached out initially to companies and then expanded our perspective out to foundations, organizations, and individuals. If you see the little Tech ALS guy, there's a chip up there for Kulik and Safa and a rocket that I'm hoping Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos latch on to and claim that sponsorship. So next slide, please. All right, so working with this amazing HEALEY team, I've spent 30 years, I've worked with hundreds of tech companies, I've held 2 professorships, and I've never seen such a brilliant, motivated, engaged, caring group of people working on a big problem. So, it gives me tremendous hope for ALS patients that will have a cure in my lifetime. So it's really been a pleasure working with this team. Next slide. And then we're all familiar with the great advances of the HEALEY platform trial and accelerating the trial, reducing placebo, having an active treatment phase where no one goes home empty-handed, getting more longitudinal survivability data, but really expanded access was missing from the overall package, and that's where we felt the greatest unmet need was, and that's where TechVSALS has focused. Next slide. So I stole this slide from Sabrina, but it's clearly extremely hopeful when we see this big acceleration of clinical trials that's been happening. Using my hockey analogy, more shots on goal is going to lead to more promising therapies available for EAPs and more bridges to regulatory approval needed, which again shows the desperate importance of having the EAP infrastructure in place. Next slide, please. All right, so we focus first on my company, Kulik and Safa, and I was tremendously touched and grateful that they went in as the founding sponsor and donated to set up an EAP site here at Jefferson Weinberg. You see the ribbon cutting ceremony back in August of 2022. And Hristelina is going to tell you more details about all the great work they've done since. Leveraging that success, next slide, please. I'm sorry. And then, if you talk to the EAP patients, both at Jefferson and other places, and the, clinicians who are intimately involved, you hear, focus on, access to these therapies, advancing the science, inclusion of patients who were previously excluded. In my mind, I think my life has been extended by my EAP participation. And then finally, hope. And, hope being so powerful. And I put a little note in there, look up the Curtis Richter Hope Experiment. But it's this tremendous research that was done at Harvard. And to make a long story short, it was about how rats, drowning rats, given some hope, would survive 270 times as long as rats without hope. So, give us ALS rats some hope, and you might be surprised how long we stick around. So tremendously powerful and tremendously important. Next slide, please. All right, and then I don't get direct credit for this, but I get an assist, to use another hockey analogy. But the Weinburg, the MGH folks talked to ALS out in California, and they picked up on the TechVSALS model and set up a ALS site in Irvine, California. And then more recently, Never Surrender in Minnesota announced that they would sponsor 2 additional EAP sites. So a total of 4 EAP sites. I did the math. I think it's like 400 patient years of EAP access. So fantastic. 2 notes on this slide. If you read the fine print for Irvine, you see that it took $486,000. Sounds like a lot of money. But the second point here is Never Surrender raised the money through a bike race there in Minnesota, a snowmobile race, which I understand Merritt went to one year, and a fishing tournament. So it shows you how grassroots fundraising can build up a lot of money and deliver on these types of EAP opportunities. So if we mobilize, if we focus, we can together put together more of these sites. So next slide, please. So expanded access progress. The other big news was the Act for ALS was signed in 2021, providing substantial additional fundings for EAP. As of May 2024, there was over 400 participants in EAPs across 21 therapies, which is, I went back to my notes, a 2 times increase over 2022. 45 sites are planned across the US and 10 for RAPA, which is a 7 times increase over 2022. So that's all great news. However, if you look at the big picture, with all this great progress, we're going to have less than 10% of eligible EAP patients have access to expanded access. So obviously more work to do. Next slide, please. So what's next? So we're now widening the scope of TechVSALS fundraising to support a innovative new HEALEY platform trial accelerator program. And, a shout out to Merritt Sakovic. Despite all the great success of the platform trial, it wasn't enough. She reached out to the sites. She said, how do we do more faster? They said, what we need is some multi-year funding to augment our staffing and infrastructure so we can greatly accelerate trial enrollment and increase EAP access for all patients. So our new focus, a little more broad, deals with both the trial enrollment and the EAP support, but I think it's really a win-win. Next slide. So you've been asking, how can you help? How can you pitch in here and make a difference? Helping the TechVSALS, help us connect to companies and foundation, whether it's your brother or your neighbor or your cousin, someone has a connection. And I use the analogy, it's like trying to get a job in an awesome company. If you email your resume or post it on the web, you'll never hear from them. But if you find the guy who knows the hiring manager who will walk your resume down and give it to him, you have about 1,000 times more likely opportunity to get in the door. So please help us make those connections. Better yet, join our team. We need help with awareness, outreach, and grassroots fundraising. And if you don't have the time, but you have the money, get on our website, make a donation. That money, 100% goes straight through to the HEALEY Center, Merritt and Sabrina will use your donation wisely. All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much. It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Shawn. Thank you so much. And I think you really highlighted really well the critical importance of supporting sites. We want our sites to be as successful as possible with enrollment and access opportunities for all programs, whether they're trials or EAP. So absolutely, that's wonderful. And we're so excited to work with so many wonderful sites, such as the Jefferson Center for ALS. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ilieva, who leads the program.
Make sure you can hear me. So I also want to thank everyone for the opportunity to present what we have as as a center experienced with expanded access programs. I just want to first make sure, do you see well my screens, or there's something in like a add note barrier? Is there a technical aspect? There's a technical aspect?
It's showing the notes, so if it's in presentation mode, it should be good to go. We switch.
All right, let's see. No, I want to take this away. How do I take that away? Okay, give me a second. I'll go out. Okay, now I am here. Okay, so basically, the Jefferson Center is a center that was started around 2017 with the goal of offering a comprehensive care to ALS patients. So I'll tell you a few words about us, and then I'll move on to the expanded access programs. At the center of our care, the philosophy of our care is the patients and their families. And we certainly know that the way our healthcare is organized is sometimes it's a siloed system. So instead, what we try to do is to wrap up around the patients in all kinds of services, obviously the clinical services, but also clinical trials, research, and all the care that comes with this disease, including education. So this is the philosophy, and we hope to continue to follow this philosophy very closely. A lot of you know very well that clinical trials are much more regimented in the way they are done. They follow a protocol which pre-specifies exactly what type of patients can be enrolled, how many times they have to visit the centers, how they are going to be examined, with what kind of questionnaires, what kind of measurements, and a percentage of the patient, a fraction of the patients are also on a placebo instead of the actual drug. And the ultimate goal of the clinical trials is to prove that a certain therapy is changing the disease, is a disease-modifying therapy. So we'll contrast this very briefly with the philosophy of the expanded access programs. The expanded access programs are actually centered to address the needs for compassionate use and care for people who, for one reason or another, do not meet the pre-specified criteria of clinical trials. The people who are given access to this compassionate use are people who have serious or immediately life-threatening disease or conditions similar to ALS or cancer. Now is a good analogy here as well. A lot of the compassionate use expanded access programs were also developed in the area of cancer. And then there's no comparable satisfactory therapy that will help people with this condition. There is definitely no need for placebo, so all participants in the programs are given the actual investigational product. And there could be additional research-oriented questions, but that's not the goal. So on like a bird's eye view, the comparison between clinical trials and EAPs is here. The most important inclusion criteria for the expanded access programs is that someone is clinical trial ineligible, they will receive the product, and there will be an oversight by the IRB in the institution that the expanded access program is done. So for many years, the major limiting factor of why the expanded access programs were very rare and only accessible to a few people was funding. Besides the amazing work that Shawn and his initiative did, there is definite realization on the government that they need to support these programs, and the Act for ALS allocated funds for exactly expanded access programs. So in many ways, I think it's very nice to see that both the finances from grassroots organizations and philanthropy, like the kind of work that Shawn did, and also the government are coming together and supporting the same approach. This is a picture of our clinical trial room. This is our new Honickman Center, where we care for people as outpatients. And now I'll just briefly walk you through the experience of the center. The first expanded access program that we started was the AMLX one with AMX 0035, which later on became the Relivrio. What we gained is with this access to this program is that we were able to offer the a product to our patients before it was approved. And we also gained, as clinicians, we gain experience. What are common side effects? How were people tolerating the medication, etc. We were very lucky to also be able to support this through the funds that Shawn's initiative was allocating for us, because only what the company provided was insufficient. One of the only few trials that we have run that we were in the red because we had to pay to the clinical coordinator, the pharmacy, etc., was actually this expanded access program, because of the funds that were raised by Shawn. We were able not to end up completely in the red. I want to also point out that as a center, we strive for inclusion. So if we have spots, if we are able to include people, we try to do that. So we included a person from Ohio who reached out to us and was able to travel, and another patient from Texas. They came all the way trying to participate in the program. The next one is the ones done by Clini. They are doing this as a follow-up to the experience with Regimen C as part of the HEALEY trial, where we realized that there is a potential for improvement in the breathing function, and the company is allowing an expanded access program. One limitation of their approach, and it again comes down to how much they're able to finance these programs, is the number of spots. So we have been able to provide 7 spots for patients in this program, and we're fully enrolled, unfortunately. When people reach out to me, I'm very kind of sad to tell them, I'm so sorry, we cannot enroll more people. This is a limitation that's driven by the company, but reach out to us in the summertime. Predopidine expanded access program will start, and we'll be able to enroll more people with a different product, of course. One thing, again, in the exact spirit of being open and trying to support patients from all over, and doesn't matter where their immediate ALS treatment is. We had a patient who was started in this program in Florida, actually, but because of increasing need of support, they transferred to be close to family in a nursing facility in Maryland. And then the family needed to go all the way to Florida in order to bring back the product for the patient. So we said, this makes no sense. Of course, we'll take you over as our patient, even though I have never laid, my hands on this patient. I've only seen him during the consenting process. So again, the goal is to support patients and we don't stick to geographical barriers if we can provide the hope and the help with the programs. And then another patient was unable to participate in HEALEY and was heartbroken because of comorbidities that excluded them from HEALEY. And they are actually taken care of by our colleagues at UPenn. But we said, okay, let's go for it. Let's give you some, hope with this particular program. But unfortunately, as I said, right now it's closed. We also participated in another one. This is the Trecolose medicine. It was tested as regimen E in HEALEY. And as you know, because of the lack of efficacy, both the, the trial open label extension was interrupted, as well as this expanded access program was stopped. We also enrolled 3 people in this particular program. One of them was a patient also who doesn't strictly belong to the group of patients we care for. This was a patient from the Hershey area. And this patient, again, we opened the trial for them because they wanted to participate. So none of this would have been possible without the support that TechVSALS gave us. You will see this picture again. This is the cutting ribbon ceremony back in 2022. If you are in a position to help Shawn extend this mission so that not only these few places, UC Irvine, us, are able to offer, hope and help for patients, please support. With that, I'm going to stop and say thank you to everyone, to the patients foremost and caregivers, and to the clinical research coordinators, without whom we are unable to do any of this job. And also to Shawn and the support of the HEALEY Center. So with that, I think I have finished. Right, and we will be happy to address any questions that you are having for us.
Thank you. That's a fantastic example of impact, and thank you so much to the entire team at Jefferson for working with Shawn and with us and other stakeholders to make this possible for your clinic and your patients. So, Alison, I think we have a few questions.
Yeah, I know we're at time, but I do want to ask a couple of questions of you, and there's lots of comments thanking you for your great work, by the way. Shawn, for you, there's a question that's asking, in your research, are you finding that the EAP programs aren't able to expand because there aren't resources at the sites? And are you hoping that you're going to raise money through philanthropic gifts in order to help them with that?
Yeah, so time and time again, we hear that, resources are the critical need to advance these programs. There's a site initial setup cost and then patient delivery cost. It's not covered by insurance. The pharma companies typically offer the therapies for free, the medicine, but that's just a fraction of the overall cost. So it really does take a philanthropic effort right now to get it going.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Ilieva, if somebody is interested in participating in a specific EAP, what is the best first step for them to take?
I mean, if they know their center is offering that EAP, that probably is a good way. But even if the center is not offering, they can ask their physician, they can share with them, I'm interested in participating. Do you know if someone around us is offering this? And usually this information is available through clinicaltrials.gov. They can also reach out to you know, us if we are able to guide them for sure. Yeah. But speaking with the care team they have is the first step. If they don't go anywhere further, then they can also, you know, ask the community. I'm sure that people share with one another where they're participating. Yeah.
They do. That's a very good point. Dr. Paganoni, do you have anything further to add on how to express interest in being in an EAP?
Yeah, I mean, I think, absolutely, I agree with Dr. Ilieva. I do want to mention that, as Catherine just posted on the chat, we have been working with a patient advisory committee of advocates and patients and caregivers. They gave us wonderful suggestions in terms of how to communicate about EAPs. And so to put in a plug for our new and improved EAP webpage. So if you go on our website, you can find information. And I also want to say that in addition to our webpage, there's other groups that really keep up, information up to date, whether it's NEALS or I want to put in a plug also for the ALS TDI Navigator, where you can also look for available EAPs. Even if perhaps your team doesn't know. I mean, I completely agree with Dr. Ilieva. The best way to start is to talk to your physicians and care team and the community around you. But we also have a few online resources, and we have we publish a regular EAP newsletter. I believe that the most recent one was actually updated this week and should go out. It's available on our website, will be available through the link. So different ways to get information. As we know, people get information in different ways.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Ilieva, can you explain if somebody might be disqualified when they participate in an EAP, and if so, can they instead join a clinical trial?
Yeah, I think it goes the other way. You could have participated in clinical trial, and then let's say that clinical trial finishes, and for the reasons that we described, with the inclusion criteria being relatively rigid and strict, asking for people to be in the early phase of the disease within 2 or 3 years of being with first symptom onset, then that will in some patients be a disqualifier. In other patients could be the amount of air they can breathe in and out, as we measure it with the respiratory function test, the FVC. That's another unfortunately common disqualifier. So once people are no longer eligible for clinical trials, they go for the expanded access programs. And then once you're considered ineligible, you have the door is open for you for expanded access programs. The other way is actually not kind of like possible. It's usually you could have participated in clinical trial, but as time goes on, you become ineligible for other clinical trials, then you're eligible for expanded access programs.
That makes sense. Thank you. And Dr. Paganoni, last question for today. Do you have any feel for what the cost is to set up an EAP center?
Well, that's a great question. Also, Shawn can help me with that. I mean, I have to say, I'm not an expert on this. What I can say is that different amounts of money will get you different things. So I think really any money is helpful because that helps sort of get things started with, for example, hiring a coordinator to even go through the paperwork, and then more money, would also allow actual enrollment of more participants. So I don't know, Shawn, if you have ballpark numbers.
If you read the fine print on one of my slides, it's $486,000, and that initiated a site and supported 10 patients for 3 years. So that was a pretty encompassing sponsorship. As Sabrina said, we talked about smaller increments that can top up number of slots at existing sites, or some sites that have access to Act for ALS money but need that initial setup fees could come in at a lower price point. I did want to say, I talked to 2 brothers from Chicago whose mother passed of ALS, and they did a swim event and some golf tournaments and raised $2 million,
Wow.
which they've funded Dr. Ozener's research. But it just speaks to the fact that if you're willing to roll up the sleeves, those types of monies are achievable. So, you know, if you don't have an EAP down the street, let's talk.
Thank you. So I think we got to all of the questions. Shawn, I want to also thank you for mentioning, I had the privilege of meeting your wonderful wife in Florida when I met you. And thank you for bringing up the caregiver support as a past caregiver. I know that that's really important and I appreciate you doing that. And thank you both Dr. Ilieva and Dr. Paganoni for your answers, and Catherine for being our master of weekly webinars behind the scenes of Jesse. Shawn, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with anybody before we end the webinar?
It's just that, you know, it's an incredible, hopeful time for ALS patients. It stinks to be in this position, but we all got to band together and keep fighting. And again, my deep appreciation to the HEALEY Center and the awesome community for, you know, just continually pushing forward. So thanks so much.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you next week.